theyeshiva.net.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome. We're up to page Memtes. In this Maamar that we're learning via Daita Tofrish Nun Zayin, 1897, sorry. 5657, 1897. We're up to page Memtes, closer to the bottom of the page. The line starts, Roya kol prati hanimshal b'hamashal. 4, 6, 7, 8. Around 10 lines from the bottom. Roya kol prati hanimshal b'hamashal. So after explaining at length that every good communicator and teacher, in order to be effective, must restrict and curtail and limit the information and the wisdom and the inspiration and the depth to make it suitable and custom-made to the capacity, to the kalim of the recipient. And not only that, often the mashpia, the giver, the teacher, the communicator must enclose his ideas in a mashal, conveying a parable, a story, an illustration, an allegory, in order to allow the student or the child or the pupil, the disciple, to absorb the nimshal through the mashal. All of that, tzimtzum, all of this restriction and concealment discussed is only from the perspective of the recipient, because from the perspective of the giver, of the teacher, he sees within the mashal, he sees the nimshal, because for him the mashal is born out of the nimshal, where for the recipient the nimshal is born out of the mashal. It's a difference between seeing it from inside out or from outside in. So therefore the mashal never blocks, it never curtails, it never eclipses. There's no danger that from the mashal he's not going to get to the nimshal. The whole mashal was born from the nimshal. He's never going to get stuck by the mashal. He'll never see the mashal as just an external idea without any deeper reference, because often the Gemara will have mashalim or medrash, mashalim ha'adava doima. I'll give a metaphor and tell a story of a melech basav adam in Medrash Rabbi, and all the Medrashim. This is very frequent, and also in Gemara quite a few places. Mashalim ha'adava doima, a metaphor. Let's give a parable, and the story finishes, and then you have to go back to the nimshal. For the student, you hear a nice story. It could, the Machanayim books, they have nice children's stories. It was a good story. For the mashpia, on the other hand, that issue was never an issue, because the mashal grew out of the nimshal. It started from inside out. And therefore, he sees within the mashal the entire nimshal. There's l'chatchila no blockage. It's not like there's a tension, there's a paradox, there's a problem, and then he has to find it. He doesn't have to find it. The whole mashal was an outgrowth, a levush for the nimshal in order to be able to communicate it. And this is what we spoke about in the last few shiurim. He gives the example that this is true. He says that this is true about everything in the world being a mashal for a nimshal, as he gives the example of earth, with all of its properties and all of its qualities and all of its characteristics, is essentially a mashal for what's called midas hamalchus. And this means that one who sees the mashal as a nimshal doesn't see it as detached, doesn't see it as separate, but rather sees the entire physical earth as a physical incarnation of a spiritual truth. And this is true about everything in the physical world. It's nothing but a physical incarnation of a spiritual truth. As he put it, the mashal and the nimshal are really one. Just one is expressed in a spiritual way and one is expressed in a physical way. They use different language, but the message is exactly the same message, which is the concept of a mashal and a nimshal. Yeah. In parentheses, v'zeu shemechadish koyach ha'agbola sheba mashpia, sha'idei shemalbish sichle balavushim va'olamis harei ba'etzlo ha'inyan ha'leki b'muchesh mamash. And this is the chiddush, this is the advantage of the power of the limitation that the mashpia has in order to dress up the idea in all of the garments and all of the concealments, helemus. So what happens is, it allows the godliness to assume a mukhshizdik experience, a very real experience, because as a result of connecting and aligning the mashal with the nimshal, you can experience it in a very tangible and real way when you appreciate that the physical world in all of its dimensions is essentially a mashal. Nimtza. Shalagabe hamashpia ein kan shum helam v'hester klal. Ki im lagabe hamakabelu helam v'hester. The result of this discussion is that lagabe, the teacher, there was no concealment, Only the mekabel, the student, for him this may constitute a concealment. What is the concealment? That he has access only to the external aspect of the idea. Its core and essential idea remains concealed, as explained. In order for the mekabel to be able to absorb it, he has to restrict and only give a ha'ara, a ray of the idea. If this Gon is teaching his children or any student, Gemara, Rashi, Teves, Mishnayos, Chumash, anything on his level, everybody will be confused and overwhelmed. So therefore, there is a real helam v'hester l'chayra for the mekabel, who only receives a certain fraction, a limited fraction and dimension of the ideas. For the teacher, who sees the full depth even in what he is communicating, there's no concealment. But the emes is, here we come to the next gam l'gabe ha-mekabel ein ze'elam amiti. Even l'gabe the mekabel, it's a next step. Even l'gabe the mekabel, the student ein ze'elam amiti. It's not a real concealment. Sharei mikol makoim al yidei ze meirum is galilei gilui raseichel. For this is actually the vehicle through which he experiences the idea. If there was no tzimtzum, if the teacher would not restrict his flow and his depth and his length and his magnitude and the breadth, and not eclipse it, so there would be no access, the mekabel wouldn't receive anything. He would just be overwhelmed and shut down. Kanal, as we said earlier, if the teacher would have unleashed the full current of his depth, of his wisdom, as it is within his own mind, so the chushim, the intellectual capacity, the cognitive ability of the student would just be confused completely. When people get confused, they give up, they shut down. It's only by restricting that you can actually give. It's only by holding back that you can actually reveal. It's only by concealing that you actually express. It's through the tzimtzum of the teacher that the student can absorb the light of the seichel, the light and the awareness that is being conveyed. This means you can't just say for the mekabel he's just receiving concealment. On the contrary, without the tzimtzum we would get nothing. So for him this is also a process of growth, of exploration, of revelation. Ube'emes,
better than nothing, really.
Right. So till now we would think it's better than nothing. What do you want? You're saying it's a hester. Don't say it's only a hester. It's also the only way he has access to it. But be'emes, the truth is, we're saying much deeper. The chiddush we're saying here is not just, it's not only a hester for the mekabel. It's also a gili. We're saying even more. Even the full depth of the seichel, which l'chayr is being concealed, which is why he could absorb it, even this is ultimately being communicated to him. What does this mean? Shari Amri Razal, the Gemara says in Maseches Avodah Zarah Daf Hey, Loi koyim in eshadai de Rabbi adar boim shnin, aval achra boim shnin koyim. Gemara brings in Avodah Zarah in the beginning of Masechet Avodah Zarah Daf Hey, Amar Rava. Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people at the end of Parshas Kisavoy, Loi nosan Hashem lachem leiv ladas einayim lirois oznayim lishmoya ad hayoim hazeh. Hashem has not given you eyes to see, einayim lirois, oznayim lishmoya, and ears to hear, and a heart to discern, ad hayoim hazeh, till today. When is Moshe Rabbeinu speaking to the Jewish people? He's speaking a few weeks before his passing, meaning after they were 40 years together in the desert. So the Gemara says, you learn from here, like koyim inish adaita de rabbi adar boim shnit. A person cannot stand, adaita de rabbi, a person cannot appreciate, cannot master the das, the mind of his Rebbe, until after 40 years. Achar boim shnit koyim. That's why Moshe told them, we have been teaching for 40 years, but till Ad Hayoim Hazeh, you didn't see, you didn't hear, you didn't understand. Leinosin Hashem lechem leiv liris enayim liris as leiv lahavin enayim liris as nayim l'shmoya ad hayoyim hazeh. 40 years, muchat ezech, 40 years, he's teaching day and night. Until 40 years. What's pshat? What does this mean? For 40 years he doesn't understand. The diuk of the Gemara is like koyim inish adaita de Rabbi. Of course he can understand. If he doesn't understand anything, what type of Rebbe is it? And what type of Talmud is it? Moshe Rabbeinu is talking about himself, or even according to some of us, we're talking about Hashem. After 40 years you finally get it. Some say the pshat in Gemara is about himself. They're teaching, he's teaching them. However, Yitaichel, he says, Pirush daita de Rabbi. Hainu pnimi is va'atzmi is kavanasa. Daita de Rebbe means you get it the way it's in your Rebbe's mind. Of course you got what he said. But what he said was the way he conveyed it through the restrictive channels that allowed you only to absorb that which your kalim were ready to absorb. In other words, it was completely limited and eclipsed based on your capacity. That's what a good teacher does. A good teacher has to invest equal time to what he's not going to say, at least as much to what he's going to say, maybe even more. They say that in Varsha, somebody once wanted to build a yeshiva. It was called, I think, Teves Chaim. It was named after Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. So the Rosh Yeshiva became the son-in-law of Reb Chaim. His name was Reb Glicksman, Reb Hersh Glicksman. But they were first suggesting another Rosh Yeshiva. So they asked the Brisker of Reb Yitzchak Zev Halevi Soloveitchik, the Brisker of, the Reb Velvel Brisker, about a certain candidate who was a student of his father, Reb Chaim, and he thought that he wouldn't be a good idea. So they said, why? That's a big compliment. He knows what to say. He says, yeah, but was nicht zu sagen. But he doesn't know what not to say. Okay. Not saying is as important as saying. Yeah. They once asked a great pianist, one pianist asked another world-renowned pianist what his skill is, why he was such a celebrity, why he's so world-renowned. He said, I read notes as well as you, I play like you. What's the difference between you and me? And he said, the pauses. It's the pauses that make the difference. Or as Rashi would put it, Litein revach ben parsha la parsha. It's the space, it's the pause between the parsha. So it's not just literally you have to pause. Obviously, when you speak you have to pause, when you play you have to pause, when you communicate you have to pause. It's deeper. The pause represents the koyach hahelim, the koyach hatzimtzum. It's a fascinating medrash Rabbi in Parshas Kisisa. It's a very interesting medrash. It says that when Moshe came down the second time from the mountain, so he had a tremendous light radiating from his face, right? Karan Urpnei Moshe, they couldn't even look at him. He had to put on a mask to be able to, they should be able to look at him. So the Medrash Rabbi asks, where did he get this light from? Where did he get the light from? The second time. So there's different interpretations. One of them is that Hashem, the Rebbeinu Shalom, dictated the Sefer Torah to him. And he was writing. Moshe was like a secretary. The Gemara says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer or Moshe Kosev. The Gemara says, Hashem was dictating, so to speak. Like you dictate to your secretary, Lahavdil. He was taking notes. He finishes writing the Sefer Torah. And then he says, there was Diyosh and Eshtayr B'Kol Monsey. There was the ink that remained in the quill. There was the ink remained in the pen. So Moshe rubbed that ink on his forehead, and from this came the Karnei Ahoid. Now the whole medrash is very strange, but the first question is, why was the ink left over in the Kol Monsey, in the pen, in the quill? Hashem could have estimated how much ink would be needed. I understand, I put extra ink, I'm not sure how much I'm going to need. But he could have estimated, he certainly knew how much ink. So one of the explanations is, the Yosh and Eshtayr B'Kol Monsey is, there's what is said, and there's what is not said. What is not said in many ways is much deeper than what is said. There's the ink that you hold back. There's the ink in the pen. The ink in the pen that would be called pnimiyus va'atzmiyus kavanase. Right. The pauses, the hefsek, the absence, is what allows the student to absorb. If the teacher gives everything the way it is in him, there's just a shutdown. There's no recognition of the individuality of the other. A student means you create a real person, a separate entity, somebody who's going to be able to grow and teach on his own. For this, you have to consider the identity of the person. You can't consider your own identity. Yeah. What happens after 40 years? After 40 years, he says, Daita de Rabbi. Rabbi says, Koyeminish Daita de Rabbi. He stands, so to speak. Koyem means he stands, he gets, he assumes. The das of his Rav, Hainu Pnimiyas Va'atzmiyas Kavanos. The atzmiyas, the core of what he was saying, the way it was inside of him, not only the way it could be experienced at that point from your vantage point. Ukamayim Razal, just like the Gemara says in Maseches Erevin, the beginning of Yud Gimel and Beis, the Gemara speaks about Reb Meir. So the Gemara says Reb Achev or Reb Chanina said that Goli v'yadu, it's known that there was nobody in the generation of Reb Meir like Reb Meir. Why then is the halacha usually not like Reb Meir? The debates between Reb Meir and his colleagues, for example, Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda have a lot of debates in Shas. The klal usually is halacha Reb Yehuda. There are a few exceptions, but generally the halacha was not like Reb Meir. In most of the debates between Reb Meir and his colleagues, the halacha was chosen by the Sanhedrin, by the Bezdin, by the majority, like the other one. So he says, everybody, Reb Achad, the Gemara says, everybody knows that there's nobody like Reb Meir. But Lama, he's quoting here the end of the Maamar Chazal. I'm just giving you the whole Maamar Chazal. Why didn't they establish the halacha like him? Because the Chachamim could not stand. Stand here means grasp, understand, appreciate. Soiv daita. What's pshat soiv daita? So that means the end of his das. What's pshat the end of his das? The other side of it. There's the side of the das that comes to you. There's the other end that stays inside, the ink that stays in the pen. That which didn't come out by his galus. For the Rav, it was never concealed. For the student, it was concealed, because if it wouldn't have been concealed, if the whole ink would have been unleashed, there would be no parchment left, right? No, not Acher, no. But the Gemara says, the Gemara gives an example. The Reb Meir, basically, if something was tameh, he can explain how it's tahir. If something is tahir, he can explain how it's tameh. So Rashi says they didn't know what's right, what's not right. In other words, they couldn't fully understand the Meir from his own perspective, and it was very confusing. That the Gemara says that he could do it. The Gemara says others distanced themselves from Acher, and Reb Meir could learn from Acher because toichay achal uklipasay zorak. He took out the pnimius and he discarded the shells, the husks.
Question. It sounds like there's a subtle point though here. It's a person who's kom adate the Rabbi v'sof arba mishnin, and he now gets it, and he gets the pnimius, but he doesn't get it because the Rebbe ever gave him the gilui. The Rebbe only gave him the hester. He's getting it through his work. Notice he's getting it.
You're right.
With his own, whatever the word will be. Because he never got anything more directly than just the
okay, the Zog's good. Let's see. He's going to address this mamash. Upirish Rashi al etzem kavanasa. Rashi says, I don't remember. It says I don't think Rashi says this verbatim. Could be means the kavanah of Rashi. The etzem kavanah of Reb Meir. V'zeu dekoyim adaita de Rabbi hainu al etzem pnimiyus kavanasa. That's the meaning. After 40 years, you don't only understand what your Rebbe said. That could be before 40 years, hopefully. You really master the das of the Rav, the etzeb, the pnimius of his chachma, of his kavana, the core. The explanation in this is the hinin is boyerle. We explained before. The Gemara says in a few places. Sugi, the beginning of Pesachim, Dav Gimel. You have to teach your child, but your student, b'derech tzara. Derech tzara means concisely, with brevity, without complex elaborations that confuse him. What does this mean? We explained. It doesn't just mean you give up a little vart. B'derech tzara is a skill. It's a genius, because mikol makam yesh b'zeh behelim kolayim chachmasa. A real mashpia within the brevity, within the concise words, he conveys in a concealed way the full depth. As the example given from Mishnah, where Mishnah is very brief, that's the function of Mishnah. The function of Mishnah is that it should be able to be retained by almost anybody, because it was packaged in a way that is brief, concise, sharp. That's the tremendous value of learning and mastering Mishnayos. You know, Gemara, it never ends. It's complex and it's multi-layered. Mishnayos, you finish a Mishnah, you finish a Perek, you finish a Masechta. It's much more retainable. On the other hand, we know that there could be 5-10 blot Gemara or a whole blot Gemara with a lot of details analyzing every word in the Mishnah. Because Rabbi he compressed into the Mishnah the whole oimek of the Gemara. The Gemara is simply deducing, the Gemara is extracting from the Mishnah the oimek, the depth of the kavanah. What is being revealed to the recipient is an external ray, so to speak, of the wisdom. Where does he put in the concealed message, the full message? He puts it in be'inyan, meaning within the concepts that he's conveying, and sometimes it's diktukei teves, it's how to put it, how it was phrased, the phraseology. You use this word, you use that word, you use this sentence, you use that sentence, like we see Taka Mishnayos. A real Makabel, we're talking about a real teacher and a real student. It's not so common. This Makabel, after he receives, in other words, there's full trust also. There has to be full trust. After he receives the hashpah, and it settles with him, hine, kshemedaktek achakach bo'inyonim v'dikduki atevis umiyageyes atzmei bazeh, al pi ma shekibel b'his galus chuli, harei yibala oimek pnimiyus kavanosei v'etzem chachmasei, k'may shu etzel harav mamish, koidem shetzimtzim es atzmei lashpiyah. Once the Makabel absorbs it, maybe on a superficial level, now he has that information to work with. As he matures, or as she matures and grows and develops emotionally, intellectually, we're talking here about any type of hashpah. It's not necessarily, it could be a shtikl Gemara, it could be a shtikl Tosfos, it could be a Rambam, it could be a Inyan Halacha, or it could be in any tchum of life. Lahavdil also in Yanim Chachmas Chitzonius, and not even Chachma. Also, there's emotional communication, there's spiritual communication. But after he has this information and he dissects and analyzes the idea and he goes deeper into it, he himself will find layers and layers that were not accessible to him until he reaches it the way it was by the teacher. Before the tzimtzum of the teacher, furthermore, similarly, he could then also see the depth within all the mishalim that the teacher gave, the way it was by the teacher. The first thing is he has to understand the nimshal through the mashal. Dahainu shemiprati oimek hamashal hareyu boli prati oimek hanimshal bepnimis hakavana shemoy k'mayshulayim kivetachlis. From all the details and the depth of the mashal, he has to be able to extract and find what was the nimshal that was being conveyed, and finding the full depth of the nimshal, not just satisfying himself with a nice story, but really getting into the nimshal and mastering it. Oz then meir etzle prati hanimshal de hamashal. Once he reached that state, now there's no disparity anymore. There's no differentiation anymore. It's not two worlds. There's no mashal that locks the nimshal and the nimshal that is hidden beneath the mashal. Once he reached the nimshal through the mashal initially, now he can go backwards, and now when he sees the mashal, he lechatchila sees the nimshal and the mashal. Using the mashalim that we were talking about before, how everything in the physical world, its dimensions and properties and characteristics and sizes and even ratio, and there's no detail in the earth that is not a mashal for Elikos, right? But when we see the world, we just see the mashal, we don't see the nimshal as explained in previous shurim with Hashirim and Yosef and Yaakov and the various mashalim that we gave. Anything you look at, it's snowing outside today, right? We look at it, a person senses that it's a mashal. A person senses that children love snow. You sense there's a certain energy being conveyed in the world. But what we see is snow. If you bother and you spend time learning how snow emerges, so then you see the snow and you see within it an extra layer of wisdom. In other words, you see the background of the snow. So when you'll hear the weather, they'll broadcast the weather, one person will just say, this is the weather. A meteorologist might explain to you the various physical forces. The winds are coming from here, and the clouds are developing here, and the storm is started here. So now you have more background, so you could see it on a deeper layer. If you have a scientist, he can explain to you the underlying forces that generate this type of weather. And the true expert will explain to you exactly how the ice crystals and the rain droplets form in the clouds as a result of earth heating up and unleashing the vapor that comes from our crust and forming into clouds which can carry, each cloud can carry the weight of water, the weight of 400 elephants. Each cloud can carry the weight of 400 elephants. You knew that? So now you know. 400 elephants, the Beis Medrash is. I don't mean baby elephants. Each cloud, 400 elephants, and then at some points it plots. And either we enjoy a good rain or we enjoy a beautiful bedecked snow. And you go deeper and deeper into the science of it and physics of it. And why is it white? And when does it happen? And what's exactly the weather? And never mind the snow shapes. But what happens if somebody from the world of Yitzira was broadcasting the weather? He would talk about the same snow, but suddenly it would be the nimshal, not the mashal. And somebody from Bria and somebody from Atzilus, it would also be the same weather. It's all the same weather. It's the same reality. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. There's no hundreds and thousands and billions and trillions and sextillions of realities. It's all one reality. The question is, which layer of it do you perceive? From the perspective of the Nimshal, every flake of snow is the same flake, with the same shape. But it's an outer crust of an inner story, of an inner energy. And then the world becomes one. It's completely cohesive. It's completely integrated. But I begin with the mashal as a student, as a recipient. I begin with the mashal, and then from the mashal I can get to the nimshal. But then when I get to the nimshal, if I really master the nimshal, at some point koyim inish adaita de Rabbi. Then when I look at the mashal, I don't see anything separate. I see it lechatchila as an outgrowth of the nimshal. And what the great advantage is that it's bemuchash. Elikus is then something that's very real, because one can see in the physical world the manifestation of the spiritual divine energy. At that moment there is equality, there is hishtavus, there is unity between the teacher and the student. They become one. It's not anymore, I'm the giver, you're the taker. I'm on top, you're on bottom. It had to be that way because the mashpia was bringing up the makabel. But the real objective of the teacher is not to have students. The real great teachers don't want students. They want to create new teachers. They say great leaders don't want followers. Great leaders want to create leaders. But for this, you have to be able to give the follower everything. If you say, no, there's some information, it's copyright. Because if I spill the beans, then what's going to be left of me? What's going to be left? That's not a real mashpia. That's somebody with his own agendas. He's not into mashpia. He's into protecting his own maisalach. The real mashpia, the real leader, he wants to spill all the beans. Fakert. The reason he didn't spill all the beans in the beginning is so that the student should be able to get all the beans. If he would have spilled all the beans, he would have been left with no beans. I'm not talking about shalom beans. But the fact that he didn't spill that out, he didn't give it out, there was diyosh and shtayr. There's the ink that remained. The ink that remained, because of that, he has access to it, and he can ultimately receive everything. This is the moment of hishtavos. Hishtavos. Gambi yediyas v'asagas pnimiyus hakavana. You see it in the moment of Parshas Ba'aloischa. It's one of the most. It's a very extraordinary, dramatic moment in Chumash where two Nevi'im start prophesying with unauthorized prophets, Eldad and Medad, start prophesying outside of the 70 elders who Moshe Rabbeinu initiated as Nevi'im. So Yehoshua runs over to Moshe and he says, Adoini Moshe Kloyim. Moshe, my master, you should incarcerate them. Kloyim, you should put them in a keller. You should put them in prison. Why? Because they are essentially, as they say in Yiddish, they machen Shabbos fazich. They're establishing a rabbeistve. They're becoming their own people. They became prophets on their own. This is very dangerous to your authority. So Kloyim actually says two interpretations. One is put them in prison. Another interpretation, which applies timelessly, is Hatel aleim tzarchet tzibur vehem kolim me'aleim. Make them community leaders. And that's it. Once you become a community leader, they'll just perish on their own. It's good. Just give them cover. Just elevate them a little bit. Make them responsible for the kehillah. And then within 6 months, they're done. Everybody hates them. There's pashkvilin against them. They're the worst Jews who ever lived in the history of humanity. Because they had the poor fortune to become leaders. That's what Rashi says. I didn't make it up. I mean, the problems existed even in Germany in the 11th century. Hatel of France. So what does Moshe tell Yeshua? He tells him these words. Hamekane atoli mi yitein kol am Hashem neviim ki yitein Hashem es ruchai aleihem. Are you being jealous for me? Let me tell you about me. My wish is that the entire nation of God would be prophets, that Hashem confers His Spirit on every one of them. You think I get worried when there are 2 prophets? I would like all 4 million Jews to be prophets. That's my agenda. That's where you see the genuine mashpia. My objective is every Jew would be a prophet. God would confer Spirit. So at this moment, the mashpia and the makabel become one in the sense that he can also grasp the pnimius hakavana. Ella, there's still a difference. Eitzel hamashpia b'bchinas or yashar. We're now going to come to discover 2 terms, or yashar and or chayzer. Or yashar alavav yud or alavav ches. These are well-known terms in the literature of pnimius HaTorah. The writings of the Arizal, the writings of the Balatanya, the writings of all Sifrei Kabbalah, the Sifrei Hagra, most Sifrei Pnimis HaTorah, they have this expression from the Arizal, Or Yashar, Or Chayzer. Or Yashar, Shal Mashpiyah, B'chinas Or Yashar. By the Mashpiyah, it's direct light. What do we mean? The Mashpiyah starts from inside out. He starts with the Nimshal, and then he dresses it up in the Mashal. And that's how he gets to see godliness in a very realistic and real way by dressing it up in the mashal. By the makabel, it's what's called rebounding light that rebounds. The rebound light, the that returns, so to speak. He begins with the outside, and from there he goes to the pnimius. Yashar is the that comes from inside out, and Chayzer is the that returns. It's the rebound it's the returning light. From the mata, he comes back to the maila, rather than from the maila going to the mata. So it's a different process completely. From the mashpiyah, he goes from the ruchni to the gashmi, from heaven to earth, from soul to body, from inner to outer, from the divine. He brings it into the lower, to the physical, and for the Talmud, for the Makabal, it's the other way around. It's Or Chayzer, he starts off with the outer, and from there he makes a journey to the inner, and each one has its advantages.
Reflected light is not a good...
Reflected light, okay.
Rebound sounds more like it retains all its properties. Reflected is a little bit different.
It's the earth. It's the that's chayzer. It's the that's chayzer. There's the ray of the light of the sun that hits earth, right? And then there's how it bounces off earth. In the world of sports, everybody knows when you play tennis or you play these other games, there's the initial force that unleashes the ball, right? But that doesn't create the real dynamic of the game. What creates the real dynamic of the game is the rebound. The rebound is what happens when the ball hits the resistance, right? It hits the wall and it comes back, and that unleashes a whole new type of energy that you couldn't have foreseen in the beginning. Yeah. Talking about mashal and nimshal, this is a mashal. Now don't get stuck in the mashal. Don't get stuck in the mashal of tennis. Come back to the nimshal. The truth is, all of tennis is a mashal for all sports. It's a mashal for nimshal. The whole goof is a mashal for nimshal.
The way I look at reflection is that it's a little bit different when it comes back, because it's changed by what it hits. But rebound sounds like it's the same, but less.
But that's what I gave you the marshal, that rebound is not the same. Ad kedei kach, that the Yoidei Dover argue what is more important, the initial hit or the rebound.
But the rebound could be a drop shot too, right?
In a chanami.
You suck all the energy out of the shot.
In a chanami, that's true.
So is that
That's a good marshal. Sometimes...
Is that a threat to the Rebbe when the Talmud does that?
Of course.
How does the Rebbe handle that? That he's got a rebound.
Right. And sometimes a person doesn't do it. Sometimes you can detach the nimshal from the marshal completely. basically, the idea here about this whole Maamar is it's about sensitization versus desensitization. The ability to be able to look at the world, to be able to look at your life, to be able to look at your body, to be able to look at your physical organism, to be able to look at your brain, to be able to look at every aspect of your life, even its most material and corporal reality, and sensitize yourself to the inner energy of it, to be able to see the world, the universe, beginning with the inner universe, as a mashal for a nimshal. We don't start with Or Yasher, we go with Or Chayzer, the light that comes back, that ascends. It ascends milmata l'mayla versus milmayla l'mata. Umikol zayuvan, from all of this we can understand Eich shekoyach hagbola v'hester shel hamashpia. Mashe mitzamtzim amaylam sichle b'derech tzara b'mishalom v'kadoyma. This all explains to us that the entire process that we're speaking about, the capacity of limitation of the giver to conceal the seichel in brevity u'b'mishalom. He keeps on saying two things. There's derech tzara and there's mishalom. It's two separate things. Derech tzara just means it's a simplified version of the idea. When you're teaching Mishnayos or Chumash to a 6-year-old, it's not like you're teaching it to a 30-year-old who's baki in Tanakh and maybe in Shas and in Poskim and in many Mefarshim. It's a different limud, even though it's true. You're teaching the 6-year-old the truth of Chumash, but you're just giving the simplified version. Derech Tzara means a person, he can have a Rosh Hashiva, it's a huge gon. He's communicating a message the way that the student will be able to understand. If he would unleash everything he's thinking right now about this sugya, nobody would know what hit him. That's Derech Tzara. But he's still talking the information itself. The Hester is in quantity and quality, but you didn't transport it to another realm. A mashal means you completely change the subject. Now we're going to tell a story. In the Derech Tzara, you see there's an idea, you just don't know the full depth of the idea. The mashal is a transportation into another idea. And this duality is very important, because when we're going to talk about the nimshal of all of this, the nimshal, you have both elements. You have God conveying his energy b'derech tzara, and then you have God conveying his energy as a mashal. The difference is the higher worlds are all derech tzara. It's a restriction of an intense infinity that's limited. But one could still sense that it's an idea. You're sitting at a Shir Gemara. Nobody thinks they're not sitting at a Shir Gemara. I'm just not getting the full depth of the sugya. Fine, now I have to wait 40 years. A mashal, you could completely lose perspective. Right? Oh, it was a good word. It was a good joke. It was a good story today. That's it. There's nothing more than that. That would be this world. Our world is not just derech tzara. Our world is also a mashal. With a mashal, like you said before, you could detach. I'm just emphasizing, that's why you'll see a whole time he gives two details. There's derech tzara and there's mashalom. V'kadoyme, ein ze hester amiti klal. Now we understand it's not a real hester. Why? She'ein master be'emes klal. Not only for him, not even for the mekabel. She'amekabel adei ashpa kol emek p'nemis kavanas hara. A real mashpia put it all in there. Im kain ein ze hester. So it's not a concealment. The whole Maamar was saying it is a concealment, and that's why he has to do it in order to conceal it. And if it wouldn't be a concealment, it wouldn't work. That's true. That's why he says, Eine master be'emes. We know that there's a hester here, but in the ultimate scheme of things, in the truth, it's not a hester. Why? Why is it not? You have to look at it differently. The real effect of the hester is there should be gilui. It's not to conceal, it's to reveal. I'm not looking to conceal, I'm looking to give. The hester is a heichitimtze in the gilui. The hester is a din in the gilui. Sometimes people give, and the giving is a din in hester. And sometimes the hester is a din in gilui. In other words, are you looking for hester, you're looking for gilui. Sometimes you're looking for hester nebach, you have to be megala a little bit, so you're megala. Sometimes fakir, all you're looking is for gilui. In order for there to be able to be Gilu, you need the Hester. In other words, the Hester is a Hechitimtza of the Gilu. It's a din in the Gilu. It's a method of Gilu. But Mela, don't even look at it as Hester. The whole union of Hester is Gilu on two levels. The Hester right now allows him to get what he could get, and it allows him later to get everything through the Hester. What would be the alternative? Giving everything. His chushim would be confused. He would get nothing. Certainly he wouldn't get the ultimate truth, he would get nothing. Right now at least he gets a tremendous amount. Plus, you gave him something that if he holds on to it and works with it, he'll be able to reach the Oimek Pnimiyas HaKavanah of the Rav. V'nimtza, what's the summation of all of this? Sha'hester shalamashpiya einoi hester amiti kla. When we speak about the concealment of the mashpiya, even though it's true, but it's not a hester amiti kla. It's true, meaning it does conceal, but that's not called a hester for real. Adarabba, kol inyanei hu legalos. It's essentially only a process of revelation. For the process of revelation to be achieved, it must go through this restriction, this concealment, simply to reveal. So it's Adirabba. If he wouldn't be master, he would be master. If he would be Megala, that would be the Hester. Because he wants to be Megala, that's why he's being master. If he would have wanted to conceal, then he would have revealed. He wants to reveal. That's why he's concealing.
So it's more than Gilu L'Shem Hester. It's not really Gilu L'Shem Hester. It's Gilu which is Gilu.
Yes. Or to put it differently, once again, it's the difference of how the teacher sees it and how the student sees it. I may see it as Hester, but that's just a mashal. What is the Hester from the teacher's perspective? Kulai Gilui. It's just a process. If I would see it as the full revelation, it wouldn't do its work. So it has to be concealed, so I should be able to receive it. But from the teacher's perspective, is there any concealment here? No. The whole concealment is only for the purpose of revelation, and the concealment itself is revelation. That's its whole entity, that's its whole identity. Now, when we could translate this into life, this can create a paradigm shift. It becomes a game changer. And our person sees all of the concealments in his life. Because every life is filled with concealments. Every life is filled with blockages. Blockages of things that are not flowing. There's two stories here. There's the story the way it is from the outside in, and there's the story the way it is from the inside out. And from the inside out, it's not a Hester. It's in order for the Gilui to be able to be absorbed within the person, as we'll see. So therefore, V'hainu mashemevi oira seichel shel hamashpia gam pnimiyas v'atzmiyas chachmasei l'mokim nomuch harbe shegam sham yorev yizgal oira mashpia. His objective is that the deepest seichel of the mashpia should come down into a much lower place. It's easy not to give. He could keep it within himself, but he wants to bring it down to a lower place. V'hainu ma'amakabel katan she'nei berech hamashpia. This is ultimately driven by love. He wants to bring it to the person who's in a different world. Gam hu yavin v'yasegayra mashpia. He should also comprehend it. Gam oimek pnimiyas atzmiyas chachmasei. He doesn't want him to get the superficial stuff. He wants him to get all of it. And b'meila, if so, the whole Hester is really another word for Gilui. For the Gilui to happen, it goes through Hester. Hester is simply the external form that carries within it all of the revelation of the mashpia to the mekabel. This is all the mashal. We'll get to the Nimshal and Mirza Hashem tomorrow.
These words here just to me unbelievable when you say the light change. It answers something that bothers me and probably many others every day. Etzem chachmas no selam mashpia higher. Etzem chachmas no selam mashpia behelim ha'inyanim v'dikdukei ha'teves. Those words. So now I understood something that always bothered me. We're learning Gemara. Gemara turns the Mishnah upside down. I never saw those words. The Mishnah never said that. Where did you come to say that the Mishnah means Machamayis Kin? It was some crazy case. It's not the words. But the point is, the words are packaged a certain way with that Hele. And after 40 years, an Amora can figure out that this is what Rabbi Yehuda Anasi had in mind when he, with his Dukei Teves, to say that this is the real thing. The Mishnah gave you the mushal, but that specific answer with those Dukei Teves. That's much. Otherwise, how do you explain to a kid? Well, you can't give him a kid. What do you mean? You tell me stuff that's not there altogether.
Yeah. In other words, the Gemara is not imposing like people think. The Gemara manipulates the Mishnah so that it should make sense according to the Amirayim. Just like the Chazal did to Chumash. You can go back to Teresh B'Ksav. What do they do to a Pasuk Chumash? What they do to a Pasuk Chumash? with all the Yud Gimel Midas, Gzeir Shavis, Emeiniyin, Lekant, Neyukana. It's all the same Nakuda. You're not manipulating the text.
It's coming to its previous.
You're extracting, you're unleashing the full energy, the full idea that was contained in it. And it had to be contained and compressed and concealed. Because if the Mishnah would have become the Gemara, it would lose its purpose. The whole idea of the Mishnah was Derech Tzara.
That's mamish.
Yeah. Yeah. Chisura Mechsura V'Achiktan.
Put that as a comment.
Don't catch your passport.
So garments. So we are up to page Nun. We're going to continue inside. Page Nun. Yeah, page Nun. Rolling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 lines from the bottom. Line starts Pnimius, Atzmius, Chachmasei Chuli. V'nimtza be'emes. So v'nimtza, the summation of everything that's been discussed till now, is that be'emes, when you look at it from a true and wholesome perspective, when you look at it from a complete perspective, ein ze helem v'hester klal. The concealment that we have been talking about, employed by the teacher, by the mashpia, by the mentor, to influence his student, even though we explained that he has to curtail and restrict and limit and mitigate and compromise and dilute, and all of the good words that represent obstruction and concealment and a blockage, in order to convey the messages, the themes, the truths. If he would give the full depth of any idea, he would confuse the student rather than enlighten the student. He would overwhelm him rather than educate him. He would have him shut down rather than open up. He would drown him rather than lift him up. And he would simply not get through to him rather than have an impact and penetrate. And for this, he must conceal, he must mitigate, he must condense and contract and give only a limited, what he calls here, a ray, like a ray of the sun. There's only a very finite expression of the sun. If the entire sun would enter into any given home or room, or even too close to the planet, we know the results would be not just eating toast for breakfast, but being toast for breakfast, and even more than toast, ayin ve'efes, wouldn't be much of, be very edible at that point. So when you have a ray of the sun that allows us to enjoy the heat, to enjoy the light, to enjoy the luminescence, in a way that our kelim, our existences, can absorb it. So the student needs to get a ray. In addition to that, he must often employ the mashal, as we explained, the metaphor, the parable, in which contains the wisdom. And all this is a hester, it's a concealment, because it doesn't give this teacher, the student, full access, and it may completely even cause him to get stuck in the mashal and not come to the nimshal. Nonetheless, we explained this is not a real concealment. Not only for the teacher, my kamashmala, of course for the teacher it's not, because he comes from inside out, as explained. But even for the student, there's no real concealment here. The entire concealment is part of the process of revelation, of giving, of communication. In order to give, you have to block. If not, you won't have a student anymore. In order to bring this truth to a lower place, to a different place, you have to channel it. You have to give it in a way that is communicated in the fashion that can be absorbed and internalized and received by the receptacle without destroying the receptacle, which causes the receptacle simply to disengage in order to protect itself. So what looks like concealment is really, from a deeper perspective, even from the student's perspective, he will realize one day is only the objective of revelation, of gilui, of communication, of the fact that I want to bring this to him. And therefore I have to go through this process of appreciating who he is or who she is, and then channeling the wisdom in a way that a trickle of it can trickle down into his vessel and he can absorb it. Furthermore, it's not just this is better than nothing. Within the brevity and within the concise message, a real teacher contained everything, all the depth. It may take 40 years, but the student has everything. Because when he will get what he gets, he will be able to go back and climb back the ladder with this information by dissecting it and reach a space where he and the mashpia ultimately become the same. He can grasp it the way it was in the mind of the teacher before and pre any tzimtzum. It's just his process is a different process. The mashpia comes from inside out, he comes from outside in, what he calls Ur Yashar versus Ur Chayzer. So therefore, on any level, there's no real concealment here. Kiyim Adirab. If you want to say the truth, it's the exact contrary. Adirab means to the contrary. The entire Hester is really a Gilui. It's the way of processing and transporting the Ur, the energy, the light, to another domain, to a lower place, from teacher to student, because he wants to share it, not because he wants to hold back. The entire holding back is only the process of revelation. And even the full depth is ultimately being revealed here, even though at this moment it's being concealed, because if it wouldn't be concealed, he would not have Gilu, he would not have any of it. And that's true in any real communication of new ideas, of real depth, that one always has to consider what the other person can hear, and hold back accordingly, not because you want to hold back, because you want to give, and you want to give everything. And in order to give everything, you have to make sure that you give it in a way that the person can absorb it, and that's always a process. If it's to be a communication that really builds the person and goes into him, rather than just overwhelms him, and then it's not communication, then it's like the sun burning up the world, the planet, and then you have nothing left. It's not communication, it's not hashpa. This is the chal, this is all a mashal. This is all a mashal about a mashal, right? He's explaining what a mashal is, and he's giving a mashal to explain what a mashal is. So what's the mashal? The mashal is from the mashpia and the makab. But this whole concept is really a mashal. Now you'll ask, why did he have to have this mashal? So now we know why he had to have this mashal. Because without the mashal, it would be extremely difficult to understand the nimshal. Just like planet Earth is a mashal for Malchus, the Atzilus, as explained. And just like Nigla of Torah is a mashal for Nister, as we explained from the Vilna Gaon and from the Shalah and other Svarim, that Nigla is also a mashal for a nimshal. And really the mashal and the nimshal are the same. It's not two separate realities. One is the outer of the inner. One is the manifestation of the inner core in a physical fashion. And essentially, if you think about it, we spoke about this at length. The first Maamar we learned was in Torah Purim. The Maamar Chayev Inish L'Psuma B'Puria Adel Lo Yadav in our Hamala Baruch Mordechai. And there he discusses, the Balatanya says something very heavy. The Gemara says that in Sanhedrin, that the Pasuk says, Ki Dvar Hashem Baza, Hikaris Tikaris. Somebody disgraced the word of God, he'll be cut off. So the Gemara says it's talking about somebody called Mishayach Lasik B'Torah, Ve'ena Yosik, Alav Dar Shirazal, Ki Dvar Hashem Baza, Hikaris Tikaris. Somebody who has the ability to learn Torah and he doesn't learn, on him the Pasuk says, as Gemara in Sanhedrin, I think Tzaddik Tes, that he disgraced the word of God and the soul gets cut off. So Baltani asks a very interesting question. There's no limit to this. You have a Jew, you have a Jew, he's a businessman. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Hilchos Talmud Torah, you have shiurim, how much a person has to learn. Right? The Gemara says there's a person who's yotzeh, Everyone has to learn something. Mitzvahs Talmud Torah is on every Jew, every day. But how much? So the Gemara says that a person is Yotze Perik Echad Shachris or Perik Echad Arvis. He said Kriya Shema in the morning. He said Parshas Shema in the evening, in the afternoon, in the evening. Arvis was Yotze Talmud Torah. Then there's the person on whom it says V'hagisa boy Yoimam V'layla. And it really depends on your mind, on your capacity, on your circumstances. Today they would say on your ADD level, on your ADHD level, on your PDD level. Of course, what you're involved in, what your parnasa is. Person has a responsibility, of course, to support their family, to support themselves, support their wife, support their children. A person has to know what their capacity is. And it's a very relative issue. And it's a very personal issue, where you are in life, what you're capable of, how you use your time, and so on and so forth. So he says, how can it be that something, for one person, you're saying he's Yotze Perek Echad Shachris Perek Echad Arvis. The other person, he learned hours and hours and hours, yeah? And then it was a moment he wasn't Isaac in Torah, he chorus to chorus. I understand you say Chametz on Pesach is chorus, dam, eating dam is chorus, Chilul Shabbos is chorus, Achilas Yom Kippur is chorus, B'mezid, etc. But here, it's a very relative issue. The Balatanya says, which is also a paradigm shift in how you understand chorus. And the main point he makes there, I'm not going to go into the whole arichas there, it's also probably on the site of that Maamar Chayavinish in Torah Purim. But I'm sure it's there, if anybody wants to make chazara, but it's very consistent with all the discussions here, because the point, a lot of this is meyusad on that, is on that Maamar. Certain points about the mashal and the nimshal. And that is that the neshama in Gan Eden experiences a certain light. That light, the neshama has to be able to be capable of experiencing. Okay? The divine providence that leads a person to his or her parnasa, and therefore gives them a certain amount of time and energy to be able to learn Torah, it's not a random thing. It has to do with this type of soul. As he puts it, this type of soul, in order to be able to reach its place, it has to go through the mashal in order to get to the nimshal. Because the Torah in Gan Eden is the same Torah that we learn here. Just one is in the world of Gashmi, one is in the world of Ruchni. One is the mashal, one is the nimshal, which in Torah it's not two separate things. In anything it's not two separate things. It's really the same. So he said if this Jew had that hour and he didn't learn that Torah, right? He chorus to chorus. His soul is getting cut off from a certain energy, from a certain place that it belongs in, because it simply didn't have the mashal to be able to get to the nimshal.
So it's not onish? It's not the harikaris, the karis, miloshin onish?
Right. Like every einish, it's a concept of a consequence. There's the certain light that this neshama needs, and it doesn't have access to, because it didn't go through the mashal down here to be able to get to that nimshal. And this is a very relative issue, so that's where the Gemara says, Kol mi she'esim b'Torah ve'eini yosef. So this is true about everything in the world, as we said, everything in Torah. That's what the Shalah says about Dover Gadol and Dover Katan, etc., as discussed in previous show. Now we come back to the Nimsh. It says, Hadugma mikol ze yuvan l'mayla be'inyan shem havaya ve'elikim. All of this is an example, a dugma, a marshal, to understand shem havaya and elikim. Shem elikim ubchinas midas hatzimtzum v'hester. The name Elikim represents the attribute of Tzimtzum and Hester. Tzimtzum means restriction, Hester means concealment. The function of Shem Elikim is to restrict and eclipse the energy, so to speak, from Shem Havaya, the name Yud Kevavke, for one purpose. There should be able to be the emergence, Hisavos means emergence, existence, from the word Hoiva, right? Yehava, his havos, to be. Hoya, hoiva, yia, isness, is hoya, the is, the existence. We're able to be the emergence of the world, the isness, is-ness, the isness of the worlds. I know, I made up a word, yeah. Sheyuchalias his havos olam as Webster kenished. So Shem Elikim is the Midas HaTzimtzum in order to allow for his havas. That's what we said earlier in the Maamar. We spoke about Iris and Kalim, Havaya, Elikim. Elikim is Helam, Havaya is Gil. The Hinen is Boyalel, as we explained earlier, the Shem Havaya Makar Hagilu. The name Havaya represents, when we say Yudke Vovke, what does it represent? It represents the source of revelation, meaning, Vahainu, Gilui Erbe B'chinas Bli Gvul. A revelation of divine energy that is infinite, like its source. The ha'or davug b'mayir v'hu me'ein ha'mayir. The definition of or, when we use in the language of Chassidus or Kabbalah the word or, it's a metaphor. Why do we use the word light? Because light has the properties that are a very appropriate metaphor to understand a little bit the nature of the divine energy that emanates. The definition of or is it's davug b'mayir. It's always connected to the source. You can't close the window shade and ask, where did the light disappear? Where did the light disappear? When I give you information, when an artist paints a painting, even if the artist is gone, the painting remains. When light is communicated from the source, if the light is separated from the luminary, from the source, there's no light anymore. The Or is always Davak b'Mayir. That's number one. Number two, it's Me'ein HaMayir. And the two are dependent on each other. It tells you about the Mayir. It reflects the source. The light of the sun is such a type of light that when you analyze it, it's reflective of its source, of the properties of its source. The light of the moon is the light of a moon. The light of a flashlight, the light of a light bulb is its own unique light. And then this LED has its own unique light. Every Oyer reflects, Me'ein means it reflects the Mayir. That's why we use the word Oyer, because the name Oyer, which is light, is a metaphor. And the metaphor of light is, one of its metaphors is, that it reflects its source, and it's connected to its source. In this case, the luminary is not the sun, it's infinite. So the Oyer is also infinite. The Oyer is also infinite. And by the way, I'm not going to get into this at the moment, because this is not a Maamar so much focused on Oyer, even though somewhat focused on Oyer is. The fact is that some of the greatest paradoxes in physics today we observe in light, to the point that the nature of light staggers the imagination of scientists and physicists. For example, there's always the paradox, is light a particle or is light a wave? We have in the world, we have what we call particles and waves. Particle would mean if I'm throwing marbles, right? Or cherries, each one is a particle. A wave is a wave of water, for example, right? Which travels as a cohesive, integrated group. It's one larger entity. As a mikveh, or when you see it in a beach, it's a wave, versus particles which are individualized. So they studied light, and it acted like a particle, which has its own way of behavior. The problem is it also acted as a wave, which has a paradoxical type of behavior. And somehow it has a dual identity. The problem is it's a duality that's paradoxical. There's many elements in the properties of light that represent the fact that there's something very mysterious here, very paradoxical. And the reason is because Oyer is a mashal for Oyer Ein Sof. And we explained that the mashal reflects the nimshal. So everything about the physical properties of light will be such that reflect the nimshal. The difference, of course, is because it assumes ultimately a physical incarnation, even though light is not as physical as other things. It's very, very nebulous. But Sof Kol Sof, it's physical. So you're not going to have the nimshal in its full infinity. That's what the mashal is. The mashal brings it down. But in light, you could see complete paradoxical features that do not make sense rationally. And Ad Hayom Hazeh, the studies of light, as they continue, literally stagger the imagination, including the fact that once we observe it, it collapses into one identity, and it doesn't retain its paradoxes anymore, because we can't absorb that with our eyes. So when we observe it, it's either this or that, but really we prove that it's really both. Two paradoxes in the same entity. This is all about Oyer. Oyer is a mashal for the Oyer that we're talking about, which is the Oyer which is Ein Sof. If so, all oir is not commensurate with the universe, as any universe. Why? The definition of a world, even the highest spiritual world, is two things: yesh and gvul. Yesh means it has identity, and gvul means it has a finiteness, it has parameters. Infinity and finiteness are not a match for each other. That itself, one has to be able to absorb. Oir Ein Sof is bli gvul. All oilamus, every universe is based on identity, which is yesh. Yesh means there's something that has an identity. And gvul, and the two are mismatched. Omnam, ef shali is havas oilamus, ki mehagilu Oir Ein Sof. But now we have the opposite issue. You can't bring in the world without revelation of Ein Sof. Ukiyadua shekol pu'ulo hoide hisgalus koyach hapoil dafka. Every pu'ula, every activity, can only happen if the activating power emerges. So we have here a problem. The revelation of Oir Ein Sof obliterates the possibility for a world. But the concealment of Oir Ein Sof also obliterates the possibility for a world. There's no way a person, let's take in a person, can activate anything, can do any activity without some manifestation of your koyach. You want to throw a football, right? The koyach has to leave your hand and enter into the football and express itself through that football. And depends on how strong and how intense that power is, that's how high and that's how long and that's how skilled the throw will be, and hopefully the catch will be. But every pu'ula comes through a hisgalus of koyach hapoil. If you hold back, you can't act. Activity, any type of action of any sort, is from your koyach coming out. You have to go out, not in. Retreating is basically when you want to go to sleep, you want to rest, you retreat. But when you act, the koyach has to come out. So to create a world, the Ein Sof has to come out, not stay in. You have to create a world. Where's the world coming from? But if it comes out, there can't be a world. And this is why there's something called the name Elokim. What does the name Elokim represent? It conceals, it restricts, and conceals and eclipses the Oir. V'hu, what do we mean? V'hu, the Oilabis are created from Shem Havaya. But it's always through the channel of Elokim. Just like we spoke in the mashal of the teacher and the student. If he communicates his full brilliance and genius and depth in anything he's discussing, you have no student. You have a confused person. Here it's not only you have a confused world, you got no world, because you have no gvul. So therefore, what's Shem Elokim? It allows Shem Havaya to be channeled in a way that the pnimius of Oir, the core of the Oir, the infinity, is concealed, and what's channeled, what comes out, is a external ray of it. This is the entire concept that is a frequent theme in the entire Teres HaNister, and is explained in Chassidus Chabad at length. The concept of Kalim of Esses Spheres Atzilus. Atzilus is considered the highest world. Kalim means containers. The Oir of Ein Sof must go into the containers which give it identity. Suddenly you have a quality of Hashem called Chachma, a quality called Chesed. That's identity and it's finite. The fact that you can identify Hashem by characteristics, Rachum, Chanun, Rav Chesed, Emes, Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Akeil, Agadol, Agibber, Va'anoira, all of these qualities and characteristics is the way the indivisible and infinite and undefined Oir assumes some type of identity, which is called a keli. What's a keli? A keli is a container. The container contains the Oir and molds it according to its identity. And that's why he says there's a division. There's something called Chachma. There's something called Chesed. Without the kelim, what would be? The Oir would be Ein Sof and Bli Gvul. The recipient can only be something that's part of Ein Sof, not something that has a distinct identity and a distinct reality, even the most spiritual identity, which has its parameters. This is I. A world means there's something that exists outside at least in its own perception, outside of the Ein Sof. V'yesh l'bchinas erech v'shaychus la'olamus. That's the key. The keli has an erech, it has a shaychus, it has a relationship with the world. Just like the teacher, who by taking his wisdom and containing it and channeling it in a limited fashion, it's now relatable to the mind and the heart of the student. If not, there's no training somebody else. There's no bringing the light to a lower place. You could sit in your own cocoon and do your own learning, but you can't communicate. You're not a mashpia. You're not a giver.
But doesn't that make it finite? Because the olamos, by definition, the kalim of the olamos are finite. So
yeah.
Doesn't that make the or finite?
Yeah.
So it's finite within the soft, or it's not. It's finite within the kalim. It's infinite.
The oid on its own is Ein Sof. Right. The ability of the keli is what allows it to be channeled, that the recipient should be able to receive it.
So the physical world is Ein Sof or it's not Ein Sof? No.
So you want to know if the physical world is Ein Sof or not Ein Sof? Well, that's the whole mashal here. Is the teacher giving the student the full thing, or is he not giving him the full thing?
He can't give.
On one hand, it would seem he's not. We'll soon see, however, that's only a superficial perspective. He really is. That's the entire discussion here. This very question that you're asking. Yeah.
The teacher and the student are both creating kalim? The teacher creates kalim?
The student, of course, has to have the kalim. If the student doesn't put in the effort, he's not going to get anything, of course. He has to show up, too. It works both ways. The teacher got to show up in his way, and the student got to show up in their way, and then they could meet. They have to give it all they got. He opens up his kalim, and then the teacher can fill it. But the teacher has to fill his keli. And if he doesn't fill his keli, right? If he doesn't fill his keli, then it's not going to work. He has to fill his canteen. And that's why all types of teaching, anyone here who's taught or mentoring on any level, is an excruciatingly challenging task. Because it's not just you have patience and you're a nice guy and you know the material. That's all important. But the key of being able to identifying the world of the student. Identifying it. Number one. Number two, having the desire to be able to go into that world. And number three, having the skill to be able to compress your knowledge in a way that can be channeled through those kalim. That's all a big avoid. It's not simple. And what you don't say, as I said, is equally important to what you do say.
Being a parent.
Somebody after the shiur came over to me and said, "So what don't you say during the shiur?"
You don't say it.
He said, "I want to know what you don't say. What you don't say."
You couldn't handle the conversation.
No, he just wanted to understand. He said, "What don't you say?"
But if you understood, you wouldn't ask.
I appreciated the question.
Oh, Rabbi, isn't it even what you do say, everybody hears it differently anyway?
That's also true. That's true too. Yeah.
So the word, isn't that the paradox with teaching? Also.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Yeah.
How does the kingdom have the ability to restrict the R, which you can, if the R is coming the way it is?
That's a good question. How can the keli restrict R, which is Ein Sof? How do you restrict infinity? That's a good question. Like, what's this magic trick of the kelim to be able to? It's a very good question. We'll see. It's a good question. That's what he explained before, that the koyach ha'agbola comes also from the teacher himself. Atazoi. Koyach ha'gvul is part of koyach. The Avodas HaKodesh says that koyach ha'gvul is really a chelik of koyach ha'bligvul.
What does that mean? I'm just like something I never grasped.
Okay.
My reason.
Okay, yeah.
Why do we introduce?
It's a good to Shaila, yeah.
We introduced Hester in addition to Tzimtzum. Are we defining a difference?
Yeah, Tzimtzum and Hester. What's the difference of Tzimtzum and Hester? Tzimtzum means restriction, like Litzamtzem. To be Mitzamtzem, right? The Gemara has an expression a lot of times, Eine Yachal Litzamtzem Misatzmai. Litzamtzem means to be Mitzamtzem, to restrict, to limit. The Medrash has an expression, Tzimtzem Shchinosoi ben Shnei Badei Ha'aron. God compressed his divine presence between the two poles of the Aron. Tzimtzem Shchinosoi ben Shnei Badei Ha'aron. So Tzimtzem is like channeling something, like through a canal. You know, you have a a large source of water, a large pool of water, and then you channel it through a canal, the way they irrigate some of the fields, right? You channel it through a very narrow canal, and if you expand it, you're going to flood the field. You need a trickle of water. Helem and Hester are already much more dramatic. Those are concealments. To give an example, you can have a little hole in a wall, in a prison wall, and the light of the sun comes through that hole. That light is mitzumtzum, but it's not muster. It's mitzumtzum. You're not getting the full intensity. It's being restricted, but what you're getting is pure. Right? Helem and Hester means already it goes through transformations where the actual light is concealed. You may not even know it's that light. So it's different processes. Like we spoke before, there's the teacher giving a trickle of information, and then there's the teacher dressing it up in a mushal. That's already a concept of Helem or Hester.
Jews going through Hester Panim would love to have Tzimtzum instead of Hester Panim.
Right. Tzimtzum is a whole different experience than Hester.
Ultimately,
It's for the same end purpose.
Yes, the same end purpose. It's just different processes in the communication.
Is it a keli or it's a filter? Keli seems more something to contain it. What you're saying is like it's being filtered so that we can...
When you say keli here, we mean also a filter. Also a filter, because when we use the word keli, it means it's finite. It contains it. It gives it structure. It gives it parameters. And when you're dealing with infinity, you're going to have a filter for that. You have to filter out the revelation of infinity. That's what every keli does. The function of a keli is to contain, but also to give size, shape. Like when we use molds, right? You do a mold, you're giving it definition, and that's how it's going to be accessed. When you build anything, you shape a brick, or anything you shape, and you use a mold for it. What does that mold do? It doesn't change the material, but it shapes the material. It shapes the material. And the product is going to be affected by that shape. In other words, the product that comes from the oil after the keli is going to be affected by the shape of the keli, so to speak. The size, the shape, the color, the dimensions, the quality, the texture. Because that's the access. I can't get back to the material the way it was pre the mold. I now have it through the mold. And that's what I wanted. I wanted it in this shape. So the keli also creates the mold. It creates all of these dimensions that give it parameters and identity and restrictions and so forth. And in everything in life, as we spoke many times, is iris and kalim. There's nothing in life that exists as an oir without a keli and it's going to last. It's not going to. Everything has to take on a shape. We have dreams, and as long as the dreams are in our mind, they are very... big and expansive and heavenly and universal, and in your dream, you can affect the world, and tomorrow you'll come out with $9 billion already by New Year's. But there's only one problem. It's a dream. It's a dream, and it's a dream in your head. The keli is where dreams have to take on shape. Keli is when you come home and you share it with your wife, and she nods. She's like, okay, you're on one of those trips again, right? Because generally feminine energy has to do with kalim a lot. Kalim is the womb. You can give birth to children, but you have to have a womb. It's called a rechem. A rechem is the womb that carries it. And that's very critical, because when there's no rechem, there's no birth. That's called, it's the ability to be able to carry the iron. And that's true in every project and experience in life. Kalim is giving it shape, and it's not fun, because whenever you have to give something shape, you also have to figure out what doesn't belong in the shape. Kalim are always about rejection. This doesn't fit. This doesn't fit. This in the oir, it's all encompassing. Just like in the source, it's Ein Sof. I'm just giving a mashal again. I'm not talking about the nimshal. Again, we're talking about the mashal. But as always, the mashal reflects the nimshal. And kalim give it shape. They give it a mold. And they're brutal. They're not fun. No kalim are fun. It's the difference between the artist and the businessman. It's the difference between the dream and implementation of the dream. It's the difference between the concept and the facilitating of the concept. Actualizing, yeah. You know, you have a book in your mind. You want to write a book. Write it. It's not going to be easy. Any person here has ideas. A lot of people have ideas. Sit down by a computer and write it out, and you'll see. It's not going to be easy. It was so clear in your mind. Suddenly there's a blockage. Why? Because writing is always about hislapshus oiris bekalim. When you have to write something, those of you who write know what I'm talking about. The idea in your mind has a freedom to just float expansively and uninhibitedly. How are you going to put this into a paragraph? Could you put this in? You have 1,000 words, put it in. Now you have to think about it in a completely new way. Now you have to cut more than you express. Now you have to hold back. The challenge of writing is not what you're going to write, it's what you're not going to write. And what's editing? Editing is even more. This is redundant, this goes out, this doesn't belong here. Speaking, for example, doesn't require the same amount of kalim as writing. It also requires kalim. It's not like thinking. Kalim and oiris, by the way, are always relative. For example, machshava relative to dibur is what? Oiris relative to kalim, right? You know when you're daydreaming? I don't mean to wake anybody up from a daydream, but I'm sure there's 2 or 3 people who have been daydreaming the last 4 minutes. And over the last 4 minutes, you probably covered 20,000 topics. If I would ask you to say what you daydreamed during the last 2-3 minutes, anybody wants to volunteer? It's going to take you more than 2 hours. Why? Because in Oir, you could fly around the universe. When you have to speak about it, it's much more concrete. There's kalim. That's why people say, I have a great idea, say it. They can't say it. Because saying it requires surgery. It's surgery. It's surgery of the idea to get it into vessels, which are words. That's speaking. Writing is even greater kalim. Even more. It's more brutal. Because in speaking, you could be redundant. You can employ many adjectives, and people won't think you're crazy. And et cetera, et cetera. With speaking, you get away with a lot that you can't get away with writing. Writing is much more succinct. Scrutinized, yeah. Right, compact. If not, it's not good writing. It's just sloppy. It's not acceptable. It's not going to affect what you want to affect through writing. That's how it is. So these are all mashalim. Kalim and oiris are always relative. Yeah.
Can I share the daydream? So,
sure.
We don't understand it.
So the kalim and oiris got stuck in my mind about forms and content. Because that's what philosophers debate. Is it form that invites the content, or content shapes them?
Excellent. Form and content, very good. Does the content shape the form, or does the form shape the content? Right? Yeah.
So now we have these few letters Elokim, and that.
Yeah, well, like when we say Shem Elokim, again, it's a mashal. When we say Elokim, well, we're not accessing it when we say Elokim, but it's a mashal that the name Elokim carries that energy that is the koyach hagvul that channels the Ein Sof into Kalim.
So basically, in Hasidus is a Hasidic garments will invite the Hasidic content, or the Hasidic content will shape us into wearing black clothes.
Okay. Yeah. Do leaders shape their communities, or do communities shape their leaders? Dor lefi aparnus, or parnus lefi hador? Do the Rebbes look like the Hasidim, or the Hasidim look like the Rebbes? Which one comes first? Huh? Okay. It's a grace of art. Yeah. Tsur Yilot Chateshi. Tsur Yilot Chateshi, yeah. Okay.
On this or articles or wait, we once have is there a rugged shop somewhere? Oh boy, what is that? I have no clue where. Something with a rugged shop on that.
Yeah, Parshas Bahar. We spoke about the Haftarah of Bahar with Yirmiyah, Sefer HaMakna. Hashem told him to purchase. That's what you mean? During the 3 weeks we did it.
Both an acceptable word by all of them?
What?
Goal. It's called goal. It's always a goal. You never reach maybe Madrigas, I don't know, not a goal. It's the Hebrew word goal.
You mean goal as the end of it all?
Right. The goal of life.
The Gemara says, Talmidei Chachamim ein lahem menucha, loy ba'olam hazeh v'loy ba'olam haba. So the Gemara at the end of Brachas.
That's the reason it's shot.
That's Shenema Yelchum Echayil El Chayir El Elokim B'Tzion. In other words, in infinity, there's never. This is it. But when is there? When is there? I mean, even in the physical world, the Medrash says, "Misheyesh le'mana writes a Messiah, Misheyesh le'Messiah writes arba meis."
So this is why he was working so hard with the whole thing, with the yarmulke and everything, to make sure that we should understand that it's not that it's the same, because he wants to make it all simultaneous.
Yes. Ultimately, we wanted to create, show the seamless oneness of it all. The seamless oneness.
This class is brought to you by the yeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.